Thank, thank you all. And thank you, Kevin, just for having this forum here. I mean, if you haven't looked at the Austin Institute, they do amazing work. I was just looking through their website, and I was totally jealous that I'm not here in Austin to participate in all their programs. So really awesome. You know, when we talk about housing affordability, and I use the term housing affordability and not affordable housing, because affordable housing has certain connotations with terms of tax credits and things like that, but we're going to use housing affordability. What makes housing affordable? Why is it so hard to have affordability here in Austin? What can maybe we do something about it? Got a few thoughts. I'm not an expert on this, but I think you're going to get what you paid for. So, but I do have a kind of a unique vantage point, kind of as someone who studied economics, but then also as kind of a lead city planner. I kind of see a lot of those developments come through my door, and so I kind of have a unique perspective. But I think the most unique perspective is just personal experience. I think everyone here has a story when it comes to their own housing search. And I want to just tell you a little bit about mine. So I moved here to Austin in 2007. I was coming off a volunteer experience. And as someone that is young, doesn't have any money, looking for housing in Austin, you really have one option, right? It's roommates. Roommates are just this great way to offset rent. And so for many years, you know, you get connected with a group of people, and I was able to get cheap rent for just splitting a place with a bunch of roommates. So for a number of years, I was paying $350 in rent, splitting a $1,200 apartment and living in kind of a closet in the corner of it. But you know, the thing with roommates is, I don't know, who has anyone roommates here? A number of you guys. So they're kind of all up in your business, right, all the time. And as part of that too, I think one of the tough parts about roommates is that they come and go, and you're kind of at the mercy of your roommates. So if one of them leaves, that's a big chunk of your rent that just walked out the door. And so over the years, you know, starting off, you know, I started with 3 roommates, you know, paying we split $1,200 in rent. You know, and then slowly one of them moves away, one of them gets a girlfriend and then gets married. And very quickly I found myself, I'm kind of by myself. And all of a sudden this rent payment is kind of scary. You know, now it's $800 a month on my one salary as a single person. And you know, the one thing I remember, I lived in this place, it was all one bedroom apartments. And all around me, there was one person in each of those units. But as the apartment complex kept jacking up the rent, I noticed that each of those one-person units turned over, and all of a sudden couples started living there. And soon I was the only person that was the only single person. So as rent goes up, generally, you know, people are trying to find those innovative solutions and trying to split rent. And why that's important is because there are laws out there saying, how many times can you split the rent with unrelated people? I don't know if people know about those laws, but there are that you can only split one unit with 4 unrelated people. And I think that's, you know, in general, people who don't have a lot of money, if you're looking at people in poverty, you know, certain people who are first coming to this country, they try to split the rent with as many people as possible. I mean, that's just kind of how you get a roof over your head. And so, you know, I just remember particularly being this place of a little bit of fear. I saw my apartment complex was starting to renovate units. And I was like, oh no, like I don't care about granite countertops. But I knew if they were going to do granite countertops and they're putting in that investment, that meant that they were trying to raise everybody's rents. And so I was worried about getting priced out of my apartment complex. So by the mercy and grace of God, I got married myself. I say I found the sweet spot. I found a beautiful woman who had bad eyesight. But you know, I get married, and you know, my bachelor pad with St. Francis of Assisi and Gladiator, Maximus from Gladiator, and Kramer from Seinfeld. I was told that's no longer living room material, those posters. So we start looking for something that's not an apartment complex, but we're not ready for a single family house yet. And so we end up actually going to a duplex. And there's actually a whole host of what we call missing middle housing types. So it's not an apartment complex, it's not a house, it's those things in the middle. So it could be a townhouse, it could be a duplex, it could be a fourplex. But generally, these are kind of housing units that are underrepresented. And so we ended up renting a duplex. And it kind of got that neighborhood feel, but still kind of renting. And we ended up loving it so much that we bought our own duplex. And so all of a sudden, we went from being renters, always kind of looking for cheaper rent, to landlords. And on the other end, it was a very interesting switch for us, because all of a sudden, when rents went up, that worked in our favor. That was a good thing, because I had a mortgage. You pay a mortgage, and whoever's renting is now paying a portion of that mortgage. So as taxes went up, as that mortgage payment goes up, those renters are covering half to 2/3 of that mortgage. And so I always say, if someone's looking to buy a house, especially their first house, I always recommend people look at a duplex. It's a kind of a good solution in general. But it was an interesting transition to now being a landlord and actually wanting things to go up. But we start having kids. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 800 square feet. And when we first moved in, we were a married couple. But now all of a sudden, we have a kid. Okay, the kid goes in the one other bedroom. We start having 2 kids. The other kid's right next to our bed. And now it's getting cramped. And again, we're in this pinch of what do we do for our housing? On one end, basically, we didn't like our options. One option is to kind of move as far away from Austin as we can so I could commute in so we can afford a house. I didn't really like that option. My wife wanted to be at home with our kids. I didn't know how I could provide for that and afford a house in Austin on my salary. And so we actually looked into some affordable housing things. We looked at the Mueller development at the time, was touting that they would have affordable units for people in my income range. So we figured we'd look into those affordable units. And they were brand new units. They were beautiful. It was a payment we could afford. But if you look into the fine print of those affordable housing agreements, it basically said, you buy in, but if the prices go up, if things appreciate, you don't get any of that upside. Somebody else gets that upside. And so, we know how prices are in Austin. So it's like you buy a stock and you don't get any of the benefit of buying that. It just kind of seemed like a little bit of a ripoff on the back end. Just kind of what it felt like. So not really liking our options, we left Austin. We felt like we got priced out of Austin, to be quite frank. Love it here. But if we wanted kind of what our values were, for Paula to be at home with the kids, for me not to have a job where I was traveling all the time, we left, and we left for College Station. And why College Station is a little more affordable than Austin, it's just kind of simple. They've got a lot of land and not as many people. So when you have a lot of land and not as many people, the price of land is a lot cheaper. And so we land in College Station, and it comes for full circle. So we get there and we want to rent. And we're looking for a house for our family of 4, 3 bedrooms for about $1,300. And who's pricing us out but college students? They're in that same demographic. They want to have a 3-bedroom house and split it 4 ways. So they're splitting the rent, and now I'm getting priced out of the College Station rental market, which I thought was coming full circle again. So anyways, we ended up buying a house, and we're kind of there since. So it's a little bit of a story just from a first-hand perspective, but I want to kind of a little bit talk about the economics behind housing affordability and then the politics behind it to kind of lead into that. So I start with my story because it's just not unique. I mean, everybody here, I'm sure, has your own story. It's the exact same story in its own way. It's a story about trade-offs and about supply and demand. And so one of the big things, with prices in economics, it really is supply and demand. So I want to talk first about demand, housing demand. So first of all, housing demand kind of can be broken up as 2 things: housing as a place to live, and then housing as an investment. So as a place to live, housing demand is strong. Everybody needs a place, a roof over their heads. I mean, it impacts pretty much every aspect of your life. Housing in general centers where you are in the universe. What kind of people you surround yourself with, who your neighbors are, how safe you feel. There's all this research now about what neighborhood you are will dictate how healthy you are. So there's a lot of data that really says where you live matters a lot. And really when it talks about housing with everyone's daily life, you know, some of the big factors that drive demand, I should say, you know, if you've got 10,000 people that want to live on 10,000 acres, okay, housing's going to be pretty cheap. Everyone kind of gets their own acre. You know, you get 100,000 people, 1 million people on those 10,000 acres. Now everyone's duking it out for pricing and housing. It's just going to be more expensive. You know, San Francisco, Austin, you know, when all of a sudden all these people want to be in a very small place, prices are going to go up. And one of the reasons that's driving that is jobs, economic opportunity. I came to Austin myself because of the economic opportunity that was presented to me to have a job here. And so jobs tend to cluster. It's good for if you have a business, you want to be around other businesses like you. If you want to start a movie business, you probably are in Austin or Hollywood. If you want to start a tech business, you're in Silicon Valley or Austin. If you want to go into banking, you're in Charlotte. If you want to go into cars, you're in Detroit. But industry really benefits from being around each other and kind of picking its place and all clustering there. And so you're clustering in cities. And part of that is you're sharing a labor pool. So if somebody who is good at tech or wants to be in a movie, they know where to move to. If you want to be in a movie, you don't go to Omaha, Nebraska. You know, you go to Hollywood. That's just where you go. And so the labor pool's there, and industry creates that labor pool. And so with that, you know, there is this shift in our economy from a rural economy where we used to be an economy of farms, farm to market. You know, we had farms and we bring the goods to market. To now, those farms are disappearing. Rural America, if you go anywhere, it's sad. I mean, people are just leaving in droves, and they're going to these big cities, and these big cities are exploding, and especially the coolest cities are exploding. And, you know, as part of that, and especially now we have an economy where small companies, we had a lot of small companies, now we're an economy of big companies. You've got the Googles, we got the Amazons. We've got a consolidated economy where Amazon can say, I want to go here and I'm going to bring 3,000 jobs, and everybody's rushing to give them incentives because they just command so much market power. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. And so those jobs are driving people to a place, and then people from there, they want to live within 20 or 30 minutes of their job. So these jobs are clustering, and they want to live within 20 or 30 minutes. That's, you know, you spend about an hour a day in your car. That's about appropriate for most people. So when you talk about traffic congestion, that could be a good thing if you want dense living. But if you start expanding roads, then you start getting that urban sprawl. And so generally cities either grow up, they either get more vertical, or they grow out. And they grow more horizontal. And it's usually some combination of the two, growing up or growing more horizontally. And so the more you're investing in traffic infrastructure, the more you're kind of spreading out that growth over a period. You're shortening that 20-minute commute or 30-minute commute. And people are generally driving to where they can afford to, between their job and where they can afford. One of the things that I thought was interesting when I was looking for work or where I can afford a house is it occurred to me it wasn't about how much money I made. It was about how did the money my household made compare to the other people in the housing market I was competing with. So if I'm in an economy where I'm competing with Facebook and Google employees, they are, you know, really, and I'm a city government employee, they're commanding a lot more purchasing power than I am. If I'm competing with two-income households, they're commanding a lot more income than my household is. And so it's really about my household. You know, if you think about incomes, it's whoever has the most money gets first choice in housing, you know, and it kind of goes down the list. And so if you're kind of lower on that bell curve of where your income is, you kind of get second, third, fourth, fifth choices in areas and pricing. And you're starting to a little bit compromise a little bit. And so one of the key determinations, again, is jobs, and the other one is quality of life. So one of the reasons I moved to Austin, I think a lot of people move to Austin, is the quality of life here. The trails, the parks, the taco places. It's a great place to live. And so when you've got jobs and you've got quality of life, and those things go together, jobs want to be where the quality of life is, then really you've got, you know, a place that's fairly hot, a fairly hot market. But similarly, if you're looking for a place to live and you're looking for a place that's a little bit cheaper, you might be looking at places that, I don't know, there's some compromises. Maybe you're living next to railroad tracks, that the train comes every once in a while, and you're dealing with that noise. Or there's somewhere there's some pollution or some nuisance, and that's driving down prices. So again, or if you're living next to a lake, you know, that's going to drive up prices. You know, a good example of just quality of life where there's no jobs are vacation towns. If you go to a beach town, you go to the mountains in Colorado, there's really not any jobs, but people just like the quality of life, and so the housing market is just sky high in vacation towns. And they have their own affordable housing issues where the workforce can't live in the town that is trying to serve their folks because everyone's buying it for vacation rentals. So then, you know, generally people are weighing, you know, their preferences with their wallet. So generally people can afford about 30% of their income on housing. So that's generally the price point of when someone will give you a loan, either rent or a mortgage, 30% of your income, your household income. So the market research says that if people had their choice, they would live in a big house on a large piece of land. That's what kind of people want. If they have to choose between a big house and a large piece of land, then people are choosing. Do I want to live in the country? Do I want to live in the middle of the city in a condo? And people are making those choices based on their price point. And really, when you look at it a little bit more, when you talk about affordable housing, it actually goes beyond the house payment. It's actually your housing plus your transportation. So how much does it cost to live, plus how much does it cost for you to get to where you want to go? And that number really is 45%. 45% of your income to be spent on both housing and transportation. And so people will generally move out to Cedar Park or Hutto to get that less expensive house, but then they're commuting. They're spending more time in their work. They're using more gas, more wear and tear on their vehicles. So there's those trade-offs there that people are trying to basically come to and figure out for themselves. So again, there's housing as a place to live and to center your life, but then there's also housing as a real estate investment. And this is, I mean, an important piece of it to know. So Mark Twain said, buy land, they're not making any more of it, you know? And you know, as much as our population keeps increasing and the amount of land on this earth keeps staying the same, as an investment, land is a pretty safe investment. And so if you buy a piece of property, you pretty much count on it to go up. You know, that house will go up in price. And Thomas Paine, I think it was Thomas Paine that identified that he said that there will always be income inequality because there will always be people that own the land and there will always be people that rent the land. And the people that are making rent payments to the people that own the land, that gap will drive income inequality. And I thought that was a very interesting point because I did feel that as a landlord. You know, when I was paying rent, it was like throwing money down the toilet. But then when I was receiving rent as a landlord, it's basically someone was paying off my house. I mean, it was like free money, kind of. I had to fix the toilet every once in a while. But, I mean, really, that dynamic changes, and there's definitely an income switch with that from ownership, from renting to ownership, that does kind of drive income inequality. You can definitely see it. But as real estate as an investment, it's like any asset. If you buy some stock You want to buy that stock as cheap as possible. But once you buy that stock, you want that thing to go through the roof, right? I mean, you did not buy that stock for that stock to go down. And so when you're buying in, you want things to be cheap. When you're selling, you want things to go high. And so when we talk about affordable housing, people want housing to be affordable when they buy, but they don't want housing to be affordable when they're selling. And you see that, I think there's seen some articles in San Francisco where people are really fighting housing affordability because they've already owned in, they've locked into their land, they've locked into their asset, and they don't want prices to go down. They would lose money. And so I think this is a dynamic that pits people against each other. It pits renters against landlords. It pits people who are owners versus people that want to get into the market, buyers and sellers. There's a real dynamic there that really needs to be worked out, and that's how the market works it out. So on the demand, that's the demand side. Obviously, there's a lot of demand, both on as a real estate investment, where a lot of people do very well, making a lot of money in housing. People need a place to live. It's a very safe investment. So on the supply side, some people say, well, we'll just build more houses. That will lower the prices. Kind of. I mean, on the supply side, so generally, if I'm a developer, what you have to do as a developer to get a new house on the market is you basically have to convince everybody that you basically have to convince everybody that you're going to get a high price for your new unit. So like any product, just if you're in a business in general, you take a raw product, you add your expertise, and you hope you make a profit off of that. I mean, that's what any business, that's what you do. And so you can purchase an old house, you can fix it up, and you hope you can make a good return on that justified all that time and all that expense and anything that can go wrong. And so if you're a developer, you have a lot of hoops and a lot of risks that you're taking. You're putting a lot of money down, and there's a lot of codes to go through. So there's zoning codes and building codes and fire codes. And each of those codes, there's a lot of lobbying groups out there that are trying to get their interests into that code. So fire sprinklers. There's a group, that's wanting that mandate that every house have fire sprinklers, right? I mean, if that lobbying group can get written into the code that every house has to have a fire sprinkler, that industry makes a lot of money. And now I've seen groups that all firewalls should be made out of masonry and not whatever it's made out of. Like, there's all these industry groups that are trying to get their particular product into these codes to require all cities everywhere to mandate that these builders build X, Y, and Z. And in a lot of sense, it makes cities, safer. There's a lot less structure fires. In the old days, you could throw up an old shack, but now that old shack can go up in flames like this. And a lot of people died because those were unsafe. So it's definitely made us safer. Our units are now more energy efficient. It's better for the environment. So there's a lot of benefits that come from those codes. It's also a lot more expensive just to build housing. And so if you're going to build new housing, it needs to be at a price point that it makes sense to adopt all those codes. And so you're only going to see new housing for things that can reach those price points, just because all those codes are so high. You're dealing with engineering and drainage and infrastructure. And on the finance side, if a bank's going to loan me a couple $100,000, they want to know that I can get the highest price I can. So on the supply side, it's all about, can you get a high price for all the risk you're about to do to put in housing? And there's a lot of things that can go astray in that whole process. There's a lot of risk and there's a lot of money. So, and again, if you have a piece of land that it's an acre and it's $50,000, okay, you can buy that land for $50,000, get a loan for $150,000 and $200,000, and get a house for $300,000, $350,000. So that's kind of at $50,000 an acre. If you get that same house, that same acre, and it's $1 million for that acre, well, at that point, you need to put more than one house on that piece of land. You're now looking at building vertical construction. You're looking at chopping that up into many tiny bits. And so that's when you start adding density. When that price of that land really goes up, that's when those lands starts chopping up into smaller and smaller bits. That's what makes sense for the developer. And again, you're trying to, as a city, incrementally grow vertical and then kind of incrementally grow outward. You'll see cities that are kind of boxed in just geographically because of mountains or lakes or whatever, and so their prices just go up and up because there's no way for that that market to go horizontally. So it just all goes vertically as the prices go higher and higher. So, and then there's also with that, a lot of politics with new roads. So if we put in new highways, the suburbs really benefit from that. People kind of know that the suburbs vote one way and the city votes a different way. And so there's a lot of politics too around how much do we expand a sprawling development pattern? How much do we expand trying to live in infrastructure that's compact and connected? So how much do we spend on things like light rail versus highways? Those are all trade-offs that are very kind of an important one. So talked a little bit about supply and demand. We're going to talk a little bit about politics for a minute. When it comes to politics of affordability, this has been something with us that's been throughout all of history. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is, you look at Europe, the poor tenant farmer who will never own his land has to pay rent to the rich landlord in a feudal system where he's always upside down, always in poverty, will never get to be on his own. And he's in the system where he's landlocked and has no options. And so he's poor and feudal, and he's destitute for the rest of his life. And all of a sudden, that was a system based on land and affordability. And of course, all these monarchs that made a lot of money in that system. And all of a sudden, the new world opens up, right? America and ability to make your own future here. And so all these folks that had no future can start coming over here. But, there were already people here. There were Native Americans that were here. And in order for people to really expand the frontier, those people there had to be either negotiations with Native Americans or promises, and a lot of those promises were broken, or they just got moved off. I mean, the military killed, sent to reservations, people that were here so that other people could have opportunity to settle. And that's just a sad history of a little bit of the history of our country. But that's not the end of it. So, we come here, we start settling the world, and then there's racial redlining, so only certain people can buy a house. And in certain neighborhoods, if you're African American, you can't buy a house in this area, or we're not going to lend you a mortgage in this area. And so all of a sudden, a lot of people can't get mortgages. And so there's people that have bought in that were, white, and then there's people, minorities, who weren't able to do that. And all of a sudden, those laws go away, and now everyone can buy mortgages and things like that. Well, now you've got people who are selling at a higher price because all these people are now entering the market. So there's a group of people that are benefiting from that system there. And this is just part of the history. And it kind of, when we make things right over time, it's not like we ever go back and it's like, sorry, let me make things right. I mean, we start from this point forward, but everyone who's benefited from the past to this point has benefited. And then everyone else is just starting over from here. And so a lot of the inequalities that are here are passed over time. And just we kind of deal with it moving forward, but there's not kind of any making it right going back. And so, with that, in the abstract, affordable housing, who's against affordable housing? Like nobody in the abstract, right? But, and who's against job creation and growth? Who's against increasing quality of life of places? No one. Everyone's for the American dream. Everyone's for opportunities. But when it comes down to it, if there's an 80-year-old grandmother who's been in her house 40 years on a fixed income, and her taxes keep going up and up, and there's, the young tech entrepreneur who's moving to Austin, or myself who's moving to Austin, who's wanting a place to live because of that quality of life that's forcing those prices up, there's a tension there, and there's winners and losers. There's the winners and losers of those politics. And so I love to say there's like a magic answer where everybody's happy. But really, you know, if you're a seller, you want high prices. If you're a buyer, you want lower prices. It kind of is where you stand. But with that, there are, I feel like, some hopes in some ways we could improve things. One is I do think we should look into roommate laws a little bit more. How many people can split a room, and would that be okay? And that's a zoning code thing. I do think that's something just from an equity standpoint. We should be able to look at those things a little more. Again, middle housing are those opportunities between large apartment complexes and single family houses. What are those middle points? Not just for people who want to rent or want to buy, but also people who want to invest. Right now, corporately, you know, you've got huge apartment complexes and you've got large housing complexes, but there could be there used to be a point where our grandfathers would just invest in a fourplex. Everyday people used to invest in a little bit of real estate. Not everything was so gigantic. And I think that is something we need to look at a little bit more, is how we can incrementally and locally build our economies. Right here in Austin, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the Community First Village. I feel like that is the model for affordable housing done right. They've used a mixture of RVs and tiny homes, and really to get to low price points. And what they've done there is tiny homes and RVs are exempt from so many of our codes. So that's why they're able to drive down housing to a price point that's a lot lower. But people don't really want to have an RV park next to them. It's just not politically, I mean, if you talk to Alan Graham about what he had to do to get Community First there, he basically had to go to the county, because anytime he tried to propose that village in Austin, everyone would come out against it. He had to go somewhere where there was no zoning, so he can do that. So I think that's an important piece. But those RVs, as much as people might not like how they look, it is a key part of affordable housing. And then finally, I think one of the things is we got to think about our economy in general. Do we want to have an economy that's really these large corporate entities or that are driving so much of this growth, or do we want to have a little bit more of a decentralized economy of kind of mom and pops business owners, mom and pops real estate investors? That decentralization of ownership, I think, is a key part of what it is to be a little bit more affordable and kind of create that American dream of local ownership. I think that's a big component of a lot of this. And there's a lot of laws that really benefit the big and corporate. And I think more and more there's an awareness of kind of the small and the incremental kind of making a comeback. So there's a lot of hope there. And so with that, I can take some questions, or yeah, that's kind of what I got. So, yeah.